So before we go on from the ordinary level part of this topic, I just want to go through the ins and outs of the diagram of the kidney. You guys need to be able to draw the picture of the kidney. For ordinary level, you need to be able to label the cortex, which is the outer part of the kidney. The medulla, which is the inner segments that are here made up of pyramids, okay? The medulla is in orange there. We have the renal artery that comes from the aorta, and that's bringing blood rich in waste into the kidneys. We have the renal vein that comes from the vena cava, and that is bringing blood that has been cleaned by the kidneys back up to the vena cava to be brought to the heart. We then have the pelvis down here. The pelvis is going to bring urine that has been formed in the kidney into the ureter to be brought down to the bladder for storage. Okay? For higher level, there are two other labels that you need to include. You need to also include the nephron, that is here. You also need to include the collecting duct, that's at the end part of the nephron. Okay? So that's the end of the ordinary level part of the course. For higher level, you now need to be able to draw the picture of the nephron in detail, and you also need to be able to talk about urine formation and it broken down into 3 different sectors, so filtration, reabsorption and secretion. When we talk about the nephron, is it hard to place? Is it hard to know where that's actually found in the kidneys? Let's look back at the picture for a second. So, picture of the kidneys. We have the renal artery broken down into arterioles that's being brought up to the nephron. So this pale blue part here is the nephron. So we have blood being brought from the renal artery up the arterioles into the nephron here, and the urine is collected in the collecting duct down here, which is connected to the pelvis here, and pelvis is going to bring the urine that's formed into the ureter to be brought down to the bladder. So let's look back at the picture of the nephron. The overall picture, what is going on here? Dirty blood, basically blood rich in waste, is being brought to the nephron that's found in the kidneys. It's going to be cleaned out. The cleaned blood is being brought back up to the renal vein to be passed on to the vena cava to be brought back up to the heart and passed around the body. And then we have the collecting duct, which is collecting urine and being brought down to the pelvis and to be transported to the bladder through the ureter. Okay, so the different parts of the nephron, let's go through it. The renal artery comes from the aorta. So we have the aorta, big artery, broken down into a smaller artery, the renal artery. That renal artery is broken down into smaller arterioles. Those arterioles that brings the blood rich in waste are called afferent arterioles. An afferent arteriole is then broken down into this small kind of network of capillaries, which is called the glomerulus. Okay, so this network of capillaries here is called the glomerulus. Okay, blood is under a high pressure here. Okay, so we have these tiny blood vessels. Blood is being pushed down, so that high pressure is pushing pushing the substances from the blood into the Bowman's capsule, the first part of the nephron. So this Bowman's capsule is like a cup. It's going to take up all of those products, all of those small substances from the blood. It's being passed from the Bowman's capsule down into the proximal convoluted tubule. So this first part here is called the proximal convoluted tubule. From there, it goes into the loop of Henle. So this is the ascending loop of Henle and descending loop of Henle. The whole thing is called the loop of Henle here. It then goes into the distal convoluted tubule, and then the distal convoluted tubule is followed by the collecting duct, which brings the urine down into the pelvis. Okay, what is this red blood vessel that is all around the nephron? This is called the efferent arteriole. What is happening here? The efferent arteriole is a blood vessel that's going around the full nephron. It's picking up those substances that have been reabsorbed. So this efferent arteriole then leads to the renal vein. What's happening there is the renal vein is bringing the cleaned blood, the blood that has all of those substances that we want to keep in it, back up to the heart for it to be brought back around the body again. Okay, so the different parts are the afferent arteriole, the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, descending, ascending, and the distal convoluted tubule, and finally the collecting duct. Okay, going through the stages of urine formation. First part is filtration. So what does filtration mean? Basically, the blood is being filtered. So blood that is rich in waste products is brought to the glomerulus by the afferent arteriole. This blood that's rich in waste is under high pressure at this point here, and it is forcing all of the substances out of the blood into the Bowman's capsule. In the Bowman's capsule, the substance and the liquid that is formed is now called the glomerular filtrate. So where we have the number 1 written here, that's where the substances that are the start of urine formation are called glomerular filtrate. The glomerular filtrate, the second stage of urine formation is reabsorption. So what's occurring in reabsorption? In the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule, we talk about different substances that are reabsorbed the whole way through. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, here we have glucose, amino acids, salt, and water that are reabsorbed. They are reabsorbed by, water is reabsorbed by osmosis, and the other substances are either reabsorbed by active transport or diffusion. Okay, when we get to the descending loop of Henle, we have a lot of water is reabsorbed. Then we have the ascending loop of Henle, we have salts are reabsorbed. Okay, in the distal convoluted tubule, more salt and water can be reabsorbed at this stage depending on what the body's needs are. Okay, the next step in urine formation is now secretion. So secretion is all about what the body needs to excrete to make sure that the blood pH levels are controlled. So we have potassium and hydrogen ions. They are secreted back into the urine from the blood, which controls the blood's pH. So at this point in the distal convoluted tubule, that's where the blood secretes potassium and hydrogen ions into the distal convoluted tubule to control the blood's pH. This also occurs in the distal convoluted tubule with drugs, alcohol, any toxins that our body has. So if you think of urine samples or urine samples for drugs or urine samples for alcohol, we have these toxins are put back into our blood, put back into our urine at this point here. So we'll be able to tell if a person has been taking these substances. Okay? So the 3 stages again of urine formation are filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. So when we're talking about filtration, it is the formation of the glomerular filtrate from the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule. For reabsorption, we're talking about what substances are reabsorbed all along the nephron. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, we have amino acids, sugars, water, salt. In the loop of Henle, as it descends, we have water reabsorbed. In the ascending part, we have salt reabsorbed. In the distal convoluted tubule, we have, again, water and salts are reabsorbed. In the distal convoluted tubule, the 3rd stage of urine formation still occurs here as well. So we have secretion. So during the process of secretion, we're saying potassium and hydrogen ions are secreted back into the urine from the blood. So this is controlling to control the pH of the blood. Okay, and also we have other toxins that are secreted back into the urine at this stage here. So what is the end product that is produced here? We have, at the end of the distal convoluted tubule, all of the substances that have stayed in the actual nephron from the glomerular filtrate stage at the start. That is now called urine as it's mixed with urea from the liver. Okay, so when we have the urine formed, it is collected in the pelvis of each kidney, and then from the pelvis is brought to the ureter to be stored in the bladder at this stage. Okay, what happens to the blood that is cleaned? So at the start we had the renal artery is bringing blood that is rich in waste to the nephrons, and the efferent arteriole is reabsorbing substances into the blood. And then at the end of this stage we have the blood that has been cleaned, and any of the substances that we want to remain in the blood go to the renal vein to be brought to the vena cava to be brought back up to the heart. Okay, so the last part of this chapter for higher level is understanding how our body controls osmoregulation. Again, what is osmoregulation? It is controlling the amount of water and salt that is in our blood. So the hormone that's involved in this is ADH, antidiuretic hormone. It's made by the pituitary gland in the brain. It controls how permeable the collecting duct of the nephron is in our kidneys. Okay, so all of the collecting ducts of every nephron. So what does that mean? It means that when the urine has gotten to the collecting duct, our body decides, do we need to take in more water back into our blood? Or can we excrete all of this because our blood is dilute enough? How does it work? If we are dehydrated, meaning that we don't have enough water in our blood, or we have too much salt in our blood, then our body needs to keep as much water in it as possible, and less water is going to be in our urine. So our urine is going to be more concentrated. How does it happen? We have osmoreceptors in our brain, which they can detect if our blood is too concentrated and hasn't got enough water in it. So those osmoreceptors send messages for ADH to be made by the pituitary gland. So ADH is released into our blood, and what happens then? This causes the collecting duct to be more permeable to water, meaning that less water is going to be in our urine and more water is reabsorbed into our blood to make sure that the concentration of our blood is correct. The urine, as a result, has less water in it and will be more concentrated. So as I said at the start of the videos, if our urine is yellower or darker in colour, it's because we're dehydrated and our body is trying to retain as much water as possible. If our urine is more dilute, meaning it's more watery, it means that we are drinking too much water and our body is having to urinate more. So the last part of excretion is looking at the respiratory system. It's a really nice topic. It's very understandable. A lot of it hasn't changed from the junior cert. It's carrying on from the junior cert course. Okay, so when we talk about the respiratory system, you need to know the diagram of the lungs, the diagram of the actual alveolus to show gas exchange. You need to know the mechanism of breathing, so that's inspiration and expiration, breathing in, breathing out. There's one tiny part about higher level there, the rest is for ordinary level also. And we also want to look at features or adaptations of the human respiratory system that help with gas exchange, and we need to look at one breathing disorder. We are going to talk about asthma because it's relatable and we all know somebody who has it. Okay, so when we're talking about the diagram of the respiratory system, you need to include the nasal passage, the mouth, the back of the mouth, which is the pharynx. So this is where the nasal passage and the mouth actually join up. As we go further down, we have the larynx. The larynx is your voice box. If somebody had laryngitis, they can't speak, they talk like this because they have an infection in their voice box, okay? Just between the pharynx and the larynx, you have the epiglottis, which is like a lid that sits on the top of our breathing tube here to make sure that food doesn't go down the wrong way and gets lodged into our breathing tube, okay? So the breathing tube itself is called the trachea. This is in line with cartilage. So we have cartilage that goes all around it to make sure that it doesn't collapse, okay? As we go down further, the trachea separates into 2 bronchi, so 1 bronchus into each lung. So these are the 2 lungs that we have here, okay? Inside the lung, we have the bronchus divides further into the bronchioles, and then the bronchioli divide further into the alveoli. A singular is alveolus. So the alveolus is the actual unit of gas exchange that allows us to pick up carbon dioxide from our blood system to breathe out, and take in oxygen into our blood system for us to transport it all around our body. Around the lungs, we have the intercostal muscles and the ribs. The lung itself has a surrounding called the pleural membrane. So this is a doubly lined membrane that protects basically the lungs and the delicate tissue that's inside. Underneath the lungs, we have the diaphragm. So this is a muscular tissue that helps us to breathe. It moves down as we're breathing out, as we're breathing out, and it moves up as we're breathing in. Down as we breathe in, and it moves up to its dome shape as we breathe out, okay? So going through each part, I'm just going to give you a bit more explanation about each part. Your nasal passage has tiny hairs or cilia that are lining the inside of your nose, and it also produces mucus to catch any bacteria or pathogens that may enter through the air, okay? So we have those 2 methods of protection inside our nose when we're breathing in. We have our tiny hairs and we have mucus. So the 2 of them will trap any bacteria that gets in. Our mouth, obviously, our mouth is how we breathe in also. Okay, the pharynx is the back part of your mouth that the nasal passage and the mouth join together. Epiglottis is the lid that stops any food or any small substances getting down into your breathing system. Your larynx is your voice box. Your trachea is your main breathing tube that brings air into your lungs. Your bronchus or bronchi, plural, one goes into each lung. These are the lungs themselves. They're protected by the pleural membrane, which has a cavity in the middle, and it acts as a shock absorber, stops any damage being done to the lungs themselves. We have our intercostal muscles and our ribs that surround the actual lungs themselves also. So these play an important part when we are breathing, also with the diaphragm. We have the smallest unit inside the lung is called the alveoli or the alveolus for one, and that is for gas exchange. That is what allows us to exchange gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, okay? When we move down to actual gas exchange, this is the picture that you were expected to draw. So this part here, this tube here, is a capillary. So each of the alveoli are surrounded by a network of capillaries. So it has a large blood system that is picking up all of the oxygen that we breathe in and bringing the carbon dioxide that we are breathing out back up to the lungs. So each alveoli has a great network of blood vessels, great network of capillaries surrounding it. Okay, so when we're breathing in, we are breathing in oxygen. We breathe in that oxygen, it comes all the way down to each of our alveoli, which there's millions of, and the oxygen goes easily through the walls of the alveolus because it's only 1 cell thick. And then the capillary itself is only 1 cell thick as well. So the oxygen can easily diffuse from the alveolus into the capillary. Same as with carbon dioxide, when our heart beats, our blood that is rich in carbon dioxide is brought up to the lungs, and then the blood is cleaned in each of the alveoli. And we have carbon dioxide comes from inside the capillary in through the walls of the capillary and through the walls of the alveoli and into the alveolus itself for us to breathe it out. Okay, and then the cleaned blood is brought back to the heart for us to transport this all around our body for respiration. So what is the mechanism of breathing? So we know what the terms inhale and exhale mean. Inhale is when we take in gases, exhale is when we let out gases. Inspiration is another word for inhaling, and expiration is another word for exhaling. So what do the two of these entail? So when we talk about inspiration, the chest cavity enlarges because the intercostal muscles and the ribs, they come up and out. So when we breathe in, you can feel your chest cavity going out. So that's because our intercostal muscles are bringing the ribs up and out with them. And our diaphragm flattens. So this, as a result, is causing our chest cavity to enlarge, meaning that we have more room inside our chest cavity than we normally do when we're at rest, okay? The lungs have expanded as a result, and this causes air to be drawn into the lungs. So that is when we breathe in, that is inspiration or inhalation, okay? Expiration, or when we exhale, the intercostal muscles relax. They go back to normal, so that means that they go down and back closer together. And the diaphragm also relaxes and goes back to its dome shaped, where it kind of comes up a little bit. The volume of the lungs decrease, and as a result, we breathe out. We don't have the capacity to hold the gases anymore, so we breathe out. Okay, so that's what happens every time we breathe. Inhalation, exhalation, or inspiration, expiration. For higher level, you need to also know that breathing is an unconscious control of the medulla oblongata in the brain. Okay, it happens you're not thinking about it. We spend our days doing whatever we're doing whatever actions we're doing, activities as well, and our body controls our breathing unconsciously. We don't have to think about it, okay? So like we have to think about moving our hand. We have to think about moving our legs when we're walking. When we're breathing, our body does that unconsciously. The cells inside our brains, they respond to the levels of carbon dioxide. They do not respond to the levels of oxygen. So when our levels of carbon dioxide are too high in our body, maybe after exercise, that's telling our body that we need to be taking in more oxygen, getting rid of more carbon dioxide. We're not responding to the low levels of oxygen. We're responding to the high levels of carbon dioxide. That's the one point that you guys need to remember for higher level, okay, for this chapter, for this respiratory unit, okay? So how does our body have adaptations to help with gas exchange? So we have millions of alveoli in our lungs. So they're plentiful, they're numerous. That allows for a larger surface area of gas exchange to occur. Another feature that has allowed us to adapt to gas exchange is that the alveoli and capillaries are only one cell thick each. So that's allowing for easy diffusion of gases. Good blood supply, so each of our alveoli have a network of capillaries surrounding them, which allows for gas exchange to happen more readily also. The last part of excretion that I want to go through is a breathing disorder. Asthma. You guys know this already. You'll probably know more than you actually need to for the Leaving Cert chapter for here. So what causes asthma? It is an allergic inflammation causing the narrowing of our airways. So what happens is there are allergens that cause this reaction in people's bodies that suffer from asthma. So some of the allergens could be pollen, dander, the hair of animals. Symptoms of asthma: breathlessness, coughing. I've written coughing twice because it's obviously very important. Wheezing, okay, and just a general shortness of breath. How do we prevent it? we try and stay away from our allergens. You know, somebody who's asthmatic may decide, I'm not going to have an animal. Maybe they take allergen medication or antihistamines when it comes to springtime, when there's a lot of pollen in the air. Okay, the cure, what can we do to prevent any effects of this asthma? So we can use inhalers, or bronchodilators is the proper word for inhalers. And we also, in these inhalers, we sometimes have steroids in them as well, which will reduce the inflammation, causing the narrowing of our airways. Okay, any questions? Give me a shout, guys.